So one of the challenges we have with MDM is the fact that in certain software or technology areas, like it's usually like one really narrow, consistent problem that you're just trying to solve really well. It's kind of a double-edged sword, but in MDM, there is seemingly unlimited business challenges that we can solve, business problems we can solve, and they vary greatly by industry, by name, by domain, and by use case. And so what's nice about that, obviously, is that there's a ton of opportunities we have to help our prospects and customers provide business value. The challenge we have is that from a marketing and messaging perspective, it's very, very hard to sometimes speak to someone's specific pain when we're talking about MDM more generally. So we like to talk about is some of the most common things that we see from a use case perspective by some of the most common domains and by some of the industries that we work with the most. So let's talk about the customer domain. That's probably at least in our view, the main domain or the number one domain that every organization is trying to solve. Everyone's trying to figure out who their customers are. And there's really two types of organizations out there. There's B2B organizations, businesses that sell to other companies. There's B2C organizations that primarily sell to consumers. Obviously, you'll have some organizations that sell to both, but obviously in that case, both of these would apply to that organization. And I think the key thing to understand is that B2B customer and B2C customer domains are very different animals.
Right. I think the key is going to be how much value you place on each incremental customer, right? So if I'm going to be dealing with a business and I'm going to be a B2B, then each and every business relationship I have is very important to me because those business relationships might be $10,000, $10 million a year. Whereas if I'm selling pizzas to individual people, then each person is only going to spend $100 with me no matter what. So if I'm dealing with a B2B, I'm going to really want to do a lot of data stewardship. I'm going to want to understand credit worthiness and those types of things for that each and every one of my customers. When I'm talking about B2C, I'm really going to want to deal with more generic things where I'm dealing with the demographic information, understanding where my customers live, how those customers segment across the United States or the world, how those customers might do with income levels or things like that, as opposed to my other customers where I'm not really going to worry about their credit worthiness, right? If they can afford a pizza, that's between them and their credit card company.
Right. So the real difference is B2C is typically low in complexity, right?
Yes.
I'm storing information about people. Usually it's a pretty limited data set. It's their name, their address, their phone number, date of birth, depending, you might have tax IDs depending on the industry. But it's a pretty finite, narrow set of data. But so you're dealing with low complexity but high volume, right? I've got a lot of these records,
and the data may be sparse too, right? Because if they're in customer reward programs or things like that, I might get all that information. But in some cases, I just have an address. I don't even have a name, or I just have a phone number and I don't have a name or Twitter handle or whatever. So it's hard to put those things together for each customer and really bring that full customer 360 view into the B2C world.
Right. So in B2C, usually you're dealing with that high volume. I'm going to let the system figure out as much as it can on an automatic basis, right?
Yep.
And maybe I only get 90 or 95% accuracy, but I'll take that over where I was because it's definitely an improvement. And since each relationship is relatively speaking low value, worth maybe $100 on average, it's not worth having an actual physical human data steward come in and trying to get that last 5% of accuracy as you strive toward perfection. So B2C is usually high volume. The system does most of the work. Stewardship is relatively low, and we try to get the best we can for the information we have. The other variable you kind of alluded to is sparseness. In a retail environment, typically you have much more sparse information. If you're in like an insurance environment or a healthcare environment where there's a strong incentive for people to give correct information because they actually want to have a valid insurance policy or actually want to get healthcare, you're more likely to have more densely populated and a higher quality information, which does make it a bit easier to manage the data.
Absolutely, because you're going to have information that other people are going to have. You're always going to get their social security number, whereas last time I went to Best Buy, they didn't ask me for that.
Yep. Now when we get to B2B, it's completely opposite actually. We're typically dealing with, again, we said high value relationships, but far fewer of them. So you might have now only 10,000 customer records, but your average relationship might be $1 million, right? We might do $1 million of business with each of these 10,000 customers on average. That's definitely worth having people manage those relationships, make sure we have accurate information about those customers. So in that case, it's a relatively low volume typically, but very high complexity solution because, hey, we want to do fraud checks. We want to make sure this organization says who we think they are. How much credit are we willing to extend them? What are their relationships with other business entities in the world? Are they a parent or a subsidiary of other organizations? So we're going to invest a lot more time and energy into getting the best information we can about those organizations.
Yeah, and I really think that there's also a point where if you're saying B2B or B2C, those are general terms. I also want to just say that there are some consumers that are industries of themselves, right? If you're in private banking, if I'm doing gaming, right, I'm going to care about these individuals that might do $1 million of business with me. Well, that really raises to the level where that consumer is a business.
Yeah, we've seen car dealership, companies that sell cars. Well, yeah, those are, cars are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 and up. Those are higher value relationships, and those maybe are worth investing more in. Whereas a general retail, lower dollar item retail, there's less value. So there are exceptions.
So it really is a spectrum, and I don't want it to be just about the fact of whether it's an individual or an organization. It really does depend on your relationship with that individual.